Hi, everybody. We are glad you're here. Thank you. We appreciate it very much. It's good to be with you on this podcast. We've got another expert with us. Now, w- Brad Bassi has been here with us before. Brad's a personal friend. We consult, we've done some business together, but Brad brings a certain je ne sais quoi. Actually, I do know, but the French sounded good, even though I don't speak French. Brad brings a certain element, a certain essence to what he does because he's done so much. And what we're going to talk about today is yes, Brad's an appraiser, and yes, Brad appraises houses, but we're going to get into the niches that Brad has. And I got to kill my mic for a minute. Sorry about that. Thank you. Um, we're going to talk about the niches Brad is in because he's in a couple of interesting ones. Now, Brad, you do a lot of residential work, but it's specialized residential, a lot of horsey stuff, a lot of ranch stuff. But even more important is another niche you have, and that niche is appraising after catastrophes or after disasters. Now, to me, that sounds, absolutely fascinating. So, how in the world did a cowboy you're from Kansas or Oklahoma? How did a cowboy from Kansas or Oklahoma get out to Southern California and get into disaster appraising? It sounds absolutely fascinating.
Well, it's a little on the nutty side. And Tim, I really want to thank you for having me on. I truly appreciate it. You've had some really, you've had some really good people. Oh man, I got I got dogs in the background here, folks. It's a real live TV deal. Anyway, um, I got out. I was raised and came out of Missouri and Kansas. I've been thrown out of Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana. So I bounced around a little bit. I ended up out here in Southern California, and I live in a town called Temecula. And the disaster appraisal work, catastrophic appraisal work, came from because of where we live, where I'm at, with wildfires, and that's how I really got introduced into this. My former business partner and I um, uh, got involved with one of the first large wildfires in Southern California. It was actually in San Diego County. And so that was kind of our initial introduction to it. And we've done both plaintiff and defendant side of the equation. And then uh, I was also got involved early on in my career with earthquake reviews because the Northridge earthquake occurred in 1994, and I had a business relationship with my mentor, and I was commuting back and forth up to LA, and our offices were located in Brentwood, so we weren't all that far from the Northridge earthquake. So I've had a little bit of experience in a couple of different directions. Now, fortunately, we have not gone through what the people in Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina have recently gone through with the hurricanes. And we haven't had any issues with tornadoes, which I know is going to be one of the other big things that they're going to be dealing with on this from the Milton hurricane because of the backside tornadoes that occurred. But I think the disaster appraisal work is one piece of a potential appraiser's bucket, or as a friend of mine likes to call it, book of business. And the thing that residential appraisers and commercial appraisers need to be aware of is that you've got issues with making sure that you're protecting yourself prior to getting into the work. And, one of the first things that I've commented on to you when you and I were having a brief conversation about having this little podcast was making sure that you know what your E&O carrier has to say about what you're about to go do. And it's important because you got to make sure that your E&O carrier is covering you, because even though this is a disaster situation, it could also be a disaster for you if you're not careful about what you're doing and making sure that you've identified your client, who the intended user is, and who the intended users aren't, you've really got to be specific about that. And there's been some recent articles that the people um, at one of the large E&O carriers has posted. Liability Insurance Administrators, LIA, the head attorney there, Claudia, has made some comments about people that have reached out to her about some of the things that they have done that an appraiser has contacted them about on well, I went out and they asked me to go verify that the house was still standing after a flood issue. And unfortunately, later on, that appraiser ended up having people contact him because of some things that happened. And they got a copy of his report that was done for the lender. And so the appraisers have to be careful about this. And getting if they're not getting an agreement on the terms and conditions of how they're going to handle this assignment, whatever that assignment may be, um, they really shouldn't take the assignment on then, because they need to, I hate to say it in a bad word, you got to have CYA. You got to cover your backside because nobody else is going to look at it. And then, yes, you can still perform these services, and making sure that you're going in and taking a look to see, okay, is the property standing from the street? What damage does there appear to be from the outside? And if there was storm surge, the house may be standing and you may not know what the inside looks like. And I know it sounds comical to say this, but you got to make sure that the lender um, understands what you're going to do and what you're not going to do and what the potential issues may be. So, I mean, that's all part of this. But the first thing is making sure what your E&O insurance carrier says about what you're going to do and how much liability coverage you have for the types of things you're going to do, especially if it's something you've not done before. You can step off the curb and twist your ankle, and you want to make sure you don't get hurt. So,
All right, let's talk about covering one's assets. You notice I said
yes,
assets. Let's let's talk about that. Okay, now you're sitting at your desk minding your own business, and you get an email and it says, "Brad, we need you to inspect 200 houses, and we'll pay you X per house." And you're going, "Wow, that's a serious chunk of change." And what we want you to do is go by. You don't even have to go in; you just have to drive by these houses, and we want you to tell us if they're still structurally sound. Now, your background is in business. You have an MBA, you have an SRA. You are not a structural engineer. You know which end of the hammer to hit the nail with, and that's basically about it. But the client wants you to tell them if the house is still structurally sound after the earthquake, the fire, the flood, the tornado, the whatever. And you're going, wow, well, they want me to do 200 houses and they're paying me extra house. I can get this done in a week. That's a whole lot of money. I'm going to jump all over this one. Really? Is this something that an appraiser, I don't care if the appraiser is also an engineer. We're talking here as an appraiser. The client hires you as an appraiser. Is an appraiser qualified to determine structural integrity? You know, you can tell by the reticence in my voice that I don't think so. So if I'm wrong, set me straight.
you're not wrong. That's a CYA. That's making sure your assets are still your assets after you've done your 200 houses. And then 6 months later, you have a subpoena shows up for a notice to appear in court. Yeah, it, that's why I was talking about making sure you know what your E&O allows first off, and then number two is what's capable of setting up the terms and conditions. Because in the private party work that I do, which is about 98.9% of my work, I determine what the scope of work is. I determine the terms and conditions. And I just had a thought jump into my head, which is a little bit of a scary thought. Uh, but I went out and I paid uh, pretty good money to have an attorney look at my terms and conditions for the proposals that I send out. And if you're going to step off the curb for the very first time on something that's pretty lucrative, and you think there's an opportunity to be able to go do this in the future with some other opportunities, maybe working with FEMA, and if you're in an area like Georgia, the Carolinas, Maryland, New Jersey, I mean, people say, oh, why would I even worry about it in New Jersey? Well, look what happened with Hurricane Sandy. That went through and took out part of New Jersey and Long Island and parts of New York. So it can come just about anywhere. And tornadoes, those things happen. Earthquakes happen out here. We got wildfires out here. But bottom line is, you got to understand how you're going to structure your terms and conditions. And if the client is not going to be reasonable and make sure that it makes sense for what your capabilities are and for what you do, which is an appraiser. First off, I'm not doing a site inspection. I'm doing a site observation. That's the first thing. I find a way to get the word inspection out of just about anything and everything, because I'm not an inspector. I'm there to observe. I'll take a look at things that are readily observable, but that's it. And if you need something else, then you got to go hire a soils engineer. You got to hire a hydrologist. You need to hire a structural engineer. You need to hire an electrical engineer. All of these different things need to be covered if that's in fact what's going on, and especially after a disaster. Because if you're in an area where you've got storm surge, or you've got let's just take a wild example. You got a property that you see from the road, and it's on an acre of land. You can see the house from the road. It's not a big deal. You can see what's transpired. You can see, okay, I can see some of the mud levels and the storm surge has kind of come up to about 3/4 of the property. I can observe that from the road. Well, that's all good and fine, but do they have a private well? And if they do have a private well, what's the water quality? And do they have a septic tank? And where's the location of that septic tank? Well, you don't know what the water quality is. You don't know what the septic tank is still functional or not. You don't know what's happened. So these are all of the things that you have to have an understanding and protect yourself with, and make sure that the client understands what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And that needs to be agreed to in writing from both parties. And if one side's not going to do it, and you guys can't come to a reasonable terms and condition, then the old adage is, and I guess I'll probably screw up the wording on this, the old adage is, sometimes the best job I ever took is the one that I rejected and didn't accept. And I think that's going to be the case, because let's just say they want 200 houses. They want to pay you $200 a house. Well, holy moly, that's a boatload of money. Well, that boatload of money may not be the retainer that your attorney is going to require when they come talking to you because of something that got screwed up and now you got 5 people trying to sue you. And I'm not saying don't take these jobs on, because they can be lucrative, but you got to understand what your coverage is, what are your terms and conditions, and how do you want to structure those terms and conditions. And maybe you want to pay for a half an hour consult for just a couple of items with an attorney that deals with this kind of stuff. And there's 3 or 4 that pop around and they're come into my mind that are out there running around. You've had some of them on your podcast, and those are people you might want to reach out to.
Go ahead and plug them. I'll send the notice that they're on this podcast. Go ahead and plug them.
Well, Craig Capella is the guy that I just paid some money to go take a look at all my terms and conditions. And that was for my private party work, for my estates and my family law work. And I would highly recommend having a conversation with somebody like that. I would have recommended Peter Christensen, but Peter's kind of changed his boat is kind of going in a different direction. But you got a couple other people on. I think one of the guys was Mel. Is it Mel Black?
Mel Black. South Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's a couple, and there's other people running around like that, but those are people that are out there that you should be talking to.
Yeah, and there's Janine Isaacson.
Right. Oh, I forgot about Janine Isaacson. That's right. Correct.
She's out of Las Vegas. And then there's a gentleman out of Boise, Idaho. His name is Colby Reddish.
Yeah, Colby, I'm not familiar with. But if he's got a background.
He's heck of a nice.
Okay.
Oh, he started out working for working for the state of Idaho prosecuting appraisers. So,
Okay.
yeah, he knows what's going on. So,
Yeah, but those are
so
the
in
people
other
you want
words,
to
there
reach
are
out to.
people out there to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Okay.
it's not going to be just that particular assignment. You'll be able to take the things that they give you and apply that to your private party work that you're doing. You're not the typical non-lending kind of thing where you're creating the scope of work and you're sending the terms and conditions out, asking the client to review them and sign them, and then send them back through either electronic digital signatures or through the old world of a PDF where they scan it on their end and send it back. But that's all the front end of it. You haven't done anything yet. And that's the key to what's got to happen. You've got to make sure that that's put together appropriately. And if it's not, they're going to take advantage of you. And I guarantee you that if they got 200 houses and they're willing to pay you $100 or $200 an assignment, you probably ought to be charging a boatload more because there's probably a whole heck of a lot more that you're going to be involved with that you don't actually realize, because you probably should be taking a look at aerials pre to the storm. You should be looking back in time what was going on in those neighborhoods as over the course, because I'll give a plug to Google Earth, although I don't think there's going to be anybody from Google Earth watching. Um, but the historical data on Google Earth is something that I use when I'm dealing with wildfires, because I'll go back. Let's say the wildfire occurred in 2020, and I'll go back to 2015 or 2014 or back to 1998 and watch the progression of Google Earth on the subject property and the neighborhood, because there's information that you can glean from that. There's information there that you'll be able to take a look at and say, okay, what's going on? What happened there? And you're not there to be the permit police, but all of a sudden you got outbuildings showing up in the back. And were those outbuildings close to the creek where maybe the house wasn't impacted, but maybe there's an outbuilding that you didn't know about that's now gone downstream and is 2 miles down the road. And you pull up in front and look at the street and you look at the house, go, oh yeah, everything looks great. Well, guess what? It's not great, because the prior appraisal that was done showed an outbuilding in the back or a guest house in the back that, you just pull up and look, say, oh, it looks all good to me. Those are all part of it.
So the guest house is still in the back. It's just in somebody else's backyard.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
And I say that laughingly, and I certainly and don't mean that to diminish what the poor people in North Carolina and Florida and Georgia and South Carolina and Eastern Tennessee have gone through, because that's just terrific. I mean, I've been watching what's going on, long distance. It's just terrible what's going on. But as an appraiser, if you're called out to put your appraiser hat on or your consulting hat on, whatever it may be, and that's the other thing too. If you're not appraising anything and you're observing things, maybe you're a consultant, maybe you're not an appraiser. And then you develop a scope of work and terms and conditions as a consultant. And then that takes a whole different tact. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways of, skinning a cat, or a lot of ways of hunting a wild boar or a razorback, depending upon what state you're in, or a wild pig. There's a whole lot of ways of, going out and chasing that. But, maybe you don't need to be an appraiser. Maybe they call you because they knew you're an appraiser, but hey, I don't need my appraisal hat on for this. I'm going to do this as a consultant. And if the client says, "Oh no, we need you to do this as an appraiser," well, the next question would be, "Why? I'm not appraising anything. I'm not giving value." And then all of a sudden, if you get a pause in that conversation, there's more going on here than they're telling you. And maybe, just maybe, you need to ask some more questions. And maybe they're going to give you some answers that you don't want it, that aren't going to be to your liking.
Now, you raise some interesting points. It's very typical for a bank, an AMC, to send an email, we need an appraisal on 1234 Elm Street, and here's our agreement, sign it, send it back, and go forth and do that thing. Okay, so the appraiser goes out, the appraiser appraises the house for a mortgage loan, comes back, out it goes, and with any luck at all, the appraiser never hears anything again. But that type of scope of work, those assumptions, if I read what you're saying, go right out the window for this type of appraisal work. This is much more specific, it's much more detailed, a scope of work that would probably suffice for your typical AMC GSE lender is not even close to what you're going to have to do to either appraise or consult on these properties because of the extent of damage, et cetera. For example, one of the issues you raised was building materials. And, you know, how do you do a cost approach when you know that there is going to be a significant increase in demand for drywall? And therefore, you know the price of drywall is going to go up. When you also know that the cost manual that you're going to consult doesn't take into account that drywall is going to go up by 25% because the supplier is saying, "Hey, look, we can gouge. There's going to be an increased demand. People are going to pay whatever it is they have to pay for drywall. So we're going to raise the price of drywall 25%. So are you going to take that into account?" And then there's that old bugaboo about entrepreneurial profit. Do you have to take that into account in a cost approach? Because entrepreneurial profit is not built into the contractor's profit. And the home, you're replacing all the drywall in your house. Shouldn't you get some kind of reward for your time and your effort and your bother and your stress? So all of that has to be taken into account, correct?
Absolutely. And then on top of that, how many contractor builders do you have in the area? Because all of a sudden you're going to have a shortage. We've seen that in our wildfire situations where there was out here in Southern California, all of a sudden there weren't enough builders. And I can guarantee you their juice went up. Their profits to their contracting business, they increased a tad bit. And mainly because they were in demand and they couldn't meet the demand. So of course, then you end up with contractors showing up from different areas to come into the area. That creates another problem because they don't understand the permitting process and they don't understand what the city or county building codes are. And even though you would think they would go take a look at it, they may or they may not. And so then run into other situations. So, not only do you can have the potential material shortages, changes in pricing, you're going to have a contractor shortage. And then it's just going to be the timeline of how long will it take you to get the permits to even be able to start on the project? Because your city or county is going to have a reduced number. They're going to have only a certain number of inspectors that can come and a certain number of people that can review the plans and everything else. So now all of a sudden, instead of taking 6, 8, 10 months to do whatever needs to be done, it could be out 18 months to 3 years before things are done. So there's a lot of factors in there. And then on top of all of that, if you need to appraise the property for some particular reason, maybe a litigation situation, you're going to do the pre-disaster, and then you're going to do the post disaster. And now you're trying to figure out forecasting of other things, time adjustments, what was going on what's going on post. Everybody automatically thinks that, post a disaster, everything's going to fall apart. Well, that's not exactly true. Now, I know Randall Bell and Oral Anderson will argue with me about that. But I've seen evidence where things don't exactly go quite that way because there's
Just
a
so everybody
shortage.
knows, just so everybody knows, Randall Bell and Aurel Anderson are both experts on the analysis of post-disaster properties. Randall Bell appraised the site of the Twin Towers after they came down, and
They
uh,
did Heaven's Gate out in San Diego. They did the Manson, the mansion, the
the
Helter
Manson,
Skelter. Yeah,
yeah, the Manson property. I think they
yeah.
also did the O.J. Simpson. I think Randy also did the O.J. Simpson house. I
He
think.
did. They did they did the condo, and I don't know if they did his house or not, but I know they did the condo.
Okay, so
Yeah.
um, there is stuff out there written about post disaster appraisals. All right, speaking of stuff written, all right, you just didn't wake up one morning and say, "Okay, I am now the disaster appraisal expert," just because it's Tuesday and I had a steak last night for dinner. All right, What training, what did you have to do to get to the point where you felt comfortable taking these assignments?
Well, first off, I think I had also had a good Chianti the night before, not to go down the world of our buddy Silence of the Lambs. Uh, but there are there are classes out there. You have to go look for them, but they're there on and insurance companies. I got my first toe in the water from an insurance company. They called because they had a house that was insured that was destroyed by a fire. It's a single property, and they had certain requirements and certain things that needed to be done. And I spoke with they wanted me to get involved because of my background with acreage and custom homes, and this particular property had a horse ranch tied to it, which anybody looking at this video will see my Stetson and will kind of go, horse ranch is interesting. That was a big leap. But I had conversations with them before I took the assignment on because I needed to understand all of what they were trying to do. And then once I found out what they were needed, then I started making phone calls to a couple of MAIs, a couple of SRAs. This was prior to me being designated as an SRA with the Appraisal Institute. But I made phone calls to a couple, two or three of them and said, hey, here's what I'm running into. Tell me the pitfalls. Tell me where else I need to go. And then they gave me some referrals to some other properties. And then on the wildfire thing, it's tied to eminent domain because it's an adverse taking, if you will, because usually the defendant in most situations is usually some sort of a public utility, which is identified, at least in the state of California, as a quasi entity, public agency. So you've got a fire that started because a transformer blows up, and now all of a sudden, it's an eminent domain because it's essentially it's a take, if you will, without due process. So you have to go through and take a look at, and you treat it's not it's the verbiage is not the same, if you will, but it's the before and the after. You're having to take a look at some things. You have to look at the larger parcel, but it's tied back into, state statutes. So there's things you have to be familiar with, and you can, anything like that. There's eminent domain that's done in every state, and their appraisal institute's got a really good class on eminent domain. It's taught by one of the top dog appraisers running around the country. A guy named Stephen Roach out of San Diego. He's done eminent domain work in multiple states and probably even gone to Alaska and Hawaii for all I know. But he's done eminent domain. So there's ways to get educated in these types of things. And FEMA has some programs where they do training for their people that go out to does work for FEMA because they try to do an analysis. They try to understand from a global standpoint, what are our damages here? Because they may have to go back to Congress in order to get appropriations for this particular area. And they throw numbers around, but there's somebody in the back sitting there with the green hat and the faded light and a little lampshade, and they don't come out of the dark, but they're trying to do global study work. Well, guess what? As an appraiser, we've done global study work on wildfires so that our particular client on the defendant side would have an understanding as to what the potential damages are on 11 or 1,800 properties that were destroyed. And you look at what goes on in Florida and North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, where that hurricane went, there's a heck of a lot more than 1,800 properties that were damaged or destroyed. So they need to have an understanding of that. So there's ways that FEMA has programs that you can go, get involved with. Heck, if you're a real estate appraiser, and hate to say this, in downtimes, you may want to get on the FEMA list and see if you can get to be part of their business and get an education from them on different things. So, I mean, there's so many different attributes as to different things you can do. And I sat down, this was, oh gosh, I bet 2015, 2016, I was at an airport having a conversation with a lady that was sitting next to me at this restaurant getting ready for a flight. And we were both heading in the same direction. And the reason that person there was heading that direction was because there'd been a natural disaster. And she was a FEMA. She was a manager for this team from FEMA, and she was flying out. And so she and I were talking, and I told her what my background was, and she goes, "Oh my God, here's my business card. Would you please reach out to me?" And I did. And we had a couple of business conversations. Things didn't quite work out timing wise for me, but there was a business conversation that happened, all because I was sitting, at a restaurant and having one of my favorite, as you like to say, adult beverages, and I'm having this conversation with her, but it led me to information out of FEMA. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go about doing this to see how best you can serve and how best you can help people out. Because those homeowners, those landlords, the property owners, landlords, they all need to have some sort of help understanding what's going on. Maybe not on an individual basis, but on a group basis. And you can reach out and do some research with the insurance companies. Even though a lot of the insurance companies are now viewed as the villain, but they also have reinsurance, and they have reinsurance companies. There's multiple layers of that, and you can go research with them and see, hey, what's out there and what are the different programs, and how do you guys look at this? What do you need to understand? And in the wonderful world of artificial intelligence and the internet, that thing www actually kind of got a foothold, I guess. And you can, there's a lot of different information out there that you can resource. And all of that came about just because, not because I'm the smartest guy on the doggone woodpile, I can tell you that much. But I went out and I've continued to try and increase my educational level, mainly because I was never one of the smartest kids in class. I was told I was one of the smartest kids in the class. I just always ended up at the bottom end of the class. And so I had to work a little bit harder and a little bit longer, but that's why I think I pursued and eventually got my master's degree in business. And then eventually, after multiple stops and starts, I eventually got my SRA designation with the Appraisal Institute. And it's opened up my eyes to the different things that are available and the different things that you can be exposed to. And I'm not here as a shill for the Appraisal Institute, but get involved with different organizations, whether it's the National Association of Appraisers or whether it's going to conferences and meeting people there, whether it's the AXE conference or the summit or Val Expo or whatever it is. Get out and go get experience with these things and sit down and have conversations, because you're going to have a meeting with somebody, a Brad Bassi. You're going to have a run into somebody, and you're going to have a conversation with them. They're going to give you, you're going to ask them a couple of questions, and they're going to point you in a direction. Doesn't mean it's always right, but they're going to point you in a direction. And that's how you learn, and that's how you get more exposure, and that's how you increase and change your book of business from just doing Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or FHA or VA work into something that you can make additional money with less number of reports going out the door.
Brad, obviously, people are going to watch this. They're going to be curious. They're going to have some other questions. How would they get in touch with you?
Well, the first thing that I would throw out to them is my email address. And that's Brad Bassi. So it's my first and last name run together. I told you I wasn't very smart. I keep my email address pretty simple. So it's Brad Bassi, and that's with an I on the end, not Count Basie with an E on the end. So it's Brad Bassi, BASSI, at yahoo.com. And send me an email, and I'll respond back to you. And then you'll have my contact information with my cell phone. And if you Google my name out in Southern California, you'll find my website. And don't get thrown off when you see somebody that's actually at strawhatenterprises.com, because that's my company name. And you'll find my website out there in the wonderful world of the www. And reach out to me. And I'm more than happy to share some experience with you. And if it gets into something more evolved than that, then, we'll sit down and have a business conversation about it. But I'm always happy to try and give people information and kind of point them in the right direction and see, where their head is at and what they're thinking about and what they want to do.
Excellent. Brad, thank you. I want to thank you for your time, your candor, the extent of your knowledge about this. This is not something that a lot of people know about. This is not something you're going to pick up a magazine and read about. Of course, nobody picks up magazines anymore. But this is the kind of thing that appraisers need to know about if they are looking to modify what they do away from GSE work towards something that is probably, quite frankly, more challenging and more rewarding. So I appreciate that. And thank you for coming on. And thank you for being an expert. I appreciate it very much.
Well, Tim, it's always an honor and a pleasure to be hanging out with you. You have some really good guests that come on here, and I always am a little nervous about hanging out where Craig Morley's been hanging because I always had the opportunity to meet Jeff and Craig, and I always kind of stand back and go, I'm on the same podcast group with them. That always is a little terrifying to me, but I do appreciate your, considering me for this, and there's definitely opportunities out there. We have three-ring circuses everywhere in the country of one version or another. And I think now is, it's on front and center with everybody's mind. And I think now's the time to, make an effort to try and get a little bit smarter about some different things and understand what else is out there and what's available for you to try and increase your book of business so that you can increase your gross revenues without having to work 27 days in a week and 47 hours in a day. So
That's all. You have a light schedule then, don't you, Brad?
well, my schedule's gotten a lot lighter over the last 10 or 12 years thanks to the changes that I've made in my business. So
Excellent. All right, Brad, we appreciate it. Again, bradbassi at yahoo.com. And if you have any questions for me, get in touch with me. My email address is tim at theappraisersadvocate.com. And it'll be a pleasure to hear from you. So, Brad, I'm sure that our paths will cross. And I look forward to the next time I get to shake your hand.
well, I do too, and I'll put in a shameless plug for you that you've also been a big help for me. And so, people out there, don't be bashful about reaching out to Tim and getting his expertise and having him guide you on your appraisal business. I've learned a I've learned quite a bit from Tim, and I'm always very appreciative of. That's one of the reasons why I always try to get on here and get back because you've always been a big source of information, and I appreciate your time and all your guidance and the good direction you've given me over the past, and I appreciate that.
My pleasure, Brad. Thank you very much. Okay, until next time, everybody, thank you for being here. Hit those like and subscribe buttons. Again, Brad's email address has been up on the screen. It'll be on the show notes, as will mine. Get in touch with us. We appreciate it. And Brad, thank you. My best to your family. See you later.
Thank you.